Welcome. Let me welcome all of you to have joined in with us today. We are in week 2 of a series where we're talking about who God has called us to be together as a church. Last week, if you were with us, you heard us talk about the fact that after Jesus' death and resurrection, Jesus formed a community that came out of belief that he was Son of God because he had raised from the dead, and they were helping each other follow the teachings of Jesus. And there had never been a community like this, a community where there was no us versus them, where everybody was welcome and everybody was included, regardless of your background, regardless of your culture, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your gender, no matter what. They realized that God loves everybody. We talked about how the fact that there's this natural tendency in all of us to separate into us versus them, but in the Jesus community, in the church has no us versus them. There is just us and soon to be us. We also looked at the fact that you just never know who is one conversation away from being made close to God, who's become a part of us. And we looked at this amazing conversation that Jesus winds up having with a woman who was the most unlikely woman that felt so far away from God, who was never chosen to be in the us crowd. She was always them, but it just took one conversation that Jesus had where everything changed for her. And once she realized there was a power that she could be included, that she was a part of the group of people that God cared about, she went back and told everybody to come and see a man that had told her everything that she had ever done. Because everybody is welcome in the community of God. Because people matter to God. Which people? All people. How much do they matter to God? More than you can possibly imagine. This is a place where everybody is welcome. But I also want to make clear that this is a place where we're just as clear on the fact that nobody is perfect. I don't know if you've ever had the experience, my guess is you have, but maybe you haven't always been aware of it, where you're in a setting where you realize that everybody in that setting is better at something than you are. I hate those kind of settings where I'm somewhere and I realize everybody in this group is at a higher level of capacity in this than I am in this group. I lived for a short time when I was younger, about 6 years during college kind of era in northern Kentucky. And I grew up in Mississippi, and I've always loved sports and always enjoyed watching sports, being a part of sports, that kind of thing. And I don't want to say that I had never seen basketball. We, of course, had a hoop, and I'd occasionally shoot baskets in the backyard. But I had never tried to play basketball, not once in my life, where I actually played a game with somebody else. In Mississippi, it was all baseball and football. That's just the way it was. Well, I'm at a church picnic in northern Kentucky, a church I was a part of at the time. And at that church picnic, they're playing basketball. And I don't know if you've ever been around people from Kentucky, but in Kentucky, everybody plays basketball all the time. So here we are at this church picnic, and I begin to watch people play basketball. They ask me if I want to play. I, of course, say yes. And I realized pretty early on that everybody who's playing this game is better than me. In fact, when we started playing, I not only realized that by watching, I realized it because I realized everybody playing is better than me. And some of the people who were playing were like 65 years old and women. That was a bad day. Now, it wasn't a completely lost day because playing in that game that day, there was a young lady who was an all-state basketball player in Kentucky, and she was really good, and I kept getting on her case saying that she fouled me all the time, and eventually she was getting a drink of water, and she was sort of fed up with me talking back to her all the time, and she said to me, "I don't have to foul you to beat you," and then she threw the water in my face. I married that girl. It was a good day. Well, all of us have had experience where we're in a situation where we realize, I'm not as good as everybody else at this. And the good thing about that is when you're in one of those settings, at least you know. At least you know where you are on the scale, and you don't think that you're better than anybody else. I mean, it's bad to be in a situation where you're worse than everybody else, but you actually think you're better. I mean, what a horrible thing it would have been if I'd have been the person who was worst on the totem pole, which I was, but I was actually trying to teach other people how to play basketball. That would have been ridiculous. And all of us generally in those kind of settings, we're aware. I'm aware I'm not quite as good as everybody else in this area. That is, except in one area, it appears, where almost everybody struggles to sort of figure out how good they are doing. That's in the area of our relationship with God and how we are viewed before God. We tend to deceive ourselves on how close we are to God. In this area of my relationship with God and my character development and how God sees me and how I really am, in this area, people tend to think of themselves as doing way better than they actually are. I mean, every one of us in this room has a tendency to think, I'm doing pretty good with God, that God probably looks at me as I'm doing pretty good. In fact, some of you here, that's sort of the way you sort of think about yourself, which means, of course, right there, you're automatically probably deceived. God probably does not see you the way that you do. This is a place where we start every conversation by saying, hey, nobody's perfect. That being said, that we're a place where we don't have to fake it, where you don't have to wear a mask, where you don't have to act like you have it all together. Jesus talks about this chronic human problem of us trying to fake our way through in who we really are, and what's going on inside of us, and how God actually sees us. That we tend to try to fake what's going on with us, between us and God. Because we're trying to follow God. I mean, people who wind up in places like this, where you would join together with us in this message, people like us are the ones that tend to fake this the most. I mean, after all, here you are, you're listening to a message, you're trying to be in tune with God, you're trying to get to a place where you're closer to God. The tendency that we tend to think in our mind is, well, I may not be perfect, but I'm a whole lot better than people who aren't joining in. I'm a whole lot better than people who aren't even trying to do this. I must at least be higher on the scale of those who aren't even trying to follow God. Well, Jesus tries to make clear to his community that that's not at all the way that God sees it. And to get at this, he tells them a story. But I want you to notice, before I read you the story, the way the writer actually prefaces the story. He says, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everybody else, Jesus told this parable. So we automatically know a couple of things about this audience. They were confident in where they stood before God, and they thought they were doing a lot better than everybody else, which means immediately from God's perspective, they were deceived. So to get their attention and to try to break through that shell, Jesus tells them a story. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. Now, everybody listening to this story knows immediately something that maybe you don't know if you're not a Bible person. They know who the good guy is in this story, and they know who the bad guy in this story. The good guy is the Pharisee. The Pharisee is a religious leader. He's a guy that's doing everything he can to be close to God. The bad guy is the tax collector. Tax collectors were people who had collaborated with the enemy. Rome had taken over the country of Israel, and tax collectors worked for the Roman government. They cheated their own people out of money. Tax collectors were among the most hated people in all of Israel. So when Jesus starts this story, everybody listening to the story knows there's a good guy and the bad guy. We've already got it pegged out who they're going to be. The first weird thing they would notice about Jesus' story is that the bad guy, the tax collector, has come to the temple to pray. I mean, they didn't even know tax collectors prayed. Why would a tax collector who had cheated his people so much, why would he even talk to God? And if he were going to talk to God, why would he come to the temple with a whole bunch of people who he knew did not like him? Why would he come to that place to be around those people? The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get. Now, again, Jesus has loaded this story up so that people in his day will get exactly what's going on. And I don't want you to miss it. This religious guy, this Pharisee, he stood off by himself at a distance from everyone else. Now, they would have known that the very name Pharisee meant separate. They were people who separated themselves. They were people that thought of their devotion to God, that the way to show God how devoted they were to Him was to keep themselves separate. So that's even the name that they took. We are separate. They separated themselves so that if there was anybody ever around, like a sinful woman or a person who had cheated on anything in their world, or a thief or a tax collector, that they would not be a part of their impurity, that they wouldn't be touched and they would not become impure. They took this very, very, very seriously. Again, they thought that their devotion to being separate from everybody else, of holding themselves apart, would show to God how seriously they took being ritually pure before Him. Well, you'll notice this guy doesn't just separate himself physically. He separates himself mentally and spiritually and emotionally. He literally says out loud, but for the grace of God, I could be like that guy. I mean, thank God I'm not like that guy over there. I would be like the tax collector over there, but I keep myself separate. Now, what is it that makes him think he's doing so much better than that guy? What is it that when he looks at the room, he says to himself, hey, I'm not on the bottom of the scale. I know where I am, and I'm better than that guy. Well, it's not because he's so loving, even though God had commanded them to love their neighbor. It wasn't because he was so patient with people around him who struggled more. It was the fact that he looked at himself and he said, I fast twice a week. Now, the Jewish people, they were commanded to fast. Do you know how many times they were commanded to fast? They were commanded to fast one day a year, on the Day of Atonement. This guy says, I fast twice a week, or 104 times a year. He got 103 days of extra credit. Nailed it. I mean, he looks at himself and he goes, I know God's pleased. He said, one day I did 104. I am way better than that guy. Not only that, he says, I give 1/10 of everything. Now, 1/10 or a tithe, it was very, very serious to the Pharisees that they get this right. God had asked for a tithe. They wanted to make sure they got it right. And there are all kinds of writings about what did you have to tithe. I mean, you can read some of the Pharisaical writings, and they write long papers about, do I have to tithe on stuff that I have that have already been tithed on by the person who produced it? Like, if the farmer tithed on the mint and the cumin and all the spices, do I also have to tithe on that? It's like people who want to talk about the net or the gross. It's like how our complicated tax system, people are always looking for deductions. What this guy says is, hey, I not only fast, I tithe on everything. I don't take any deductions. God, I am completely clean. He just feels better about himself. Now, again, even if you're here and you're not religious, you know what it's like in your world, wherever you are, to make yourself feel better. It may be the way you think about yourself politically, or the way you're engaged in your community, and you may look at other people and you go, hey, I'm not doing everything right, but I am way better than other people. We all have this tendency to look down on other people and judge ourselves incorrectly in what really matters. It may not be religiously for you, but we know what it's like to be in the same place that this Pharisee is, to separate ourselves from other people. Then there's the other guy, the bad guy everybody saw, the tax collector. He's the loser. He's the misfit. He's the failure. He's the sinner. But the tax collector stood at a distance, and he would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. The tax collector, you'll notice, he also separates himself. But he doesn't do it as a matter of devotion to God. He does it because he doesn't feel like he's worthy to be around other people. He knows what people in the temple think about him. He knows how the Pharisee feels about him. He knows that he has no business being where he is, that he's blown it, that his life is a mess, that he's a total screw-up before God, and he knows it. And he's incredibly gracious that he can even be there. He knows, I am in real trouble. There's a weight on him, and he can feel it. He knows that he's done things before a holy God that are wrong. In fact, the Bible says he can't even lift his eyes up to heaven. Have you ever noticed when somebody feels really guilty about doing something, that they have a hard time looking in the eyes of the person they feel guilty about. He can't even lift his eyes to heaven, but he beat his breast. It's an expression in their day of frustration and humiliation. He says out loud, he prays this prayer, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And again, the people listening to this story had to think, well, yeah, that's what he ought to pray. I mean, dirty, rotten tax collector, traitor to all of our people. Of course, that's what he's praying. He's a cheating tax collector. And then comes the twist that nobody sees coming. Jesus says, I tell you that this man, the misfit, the tax collector, the loser, the moral failure, the sinner, I tell you that this man, rather than the other, the Pharisee, the good guy, the tither, the one who's done it all right, I tell you that the tax collector, not the Pharisee, went home justified, okay, in right relationship with God. He went on that way. And then Jesus just nets out the heart of the story. He says, for all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And everybody's jaw hit the floor. Really? I thought we read the room right. I thought we knew where everybody stood. Really? The tax collector? He went home justified? Because, of course, these people all knew what it took to be a really good person. Just like you know, in our world, what it takes. We think we know what it takes, what it means to be a good person. We know, all of us know, there are bad people out there. But we all have this way of exonerating ourselves and separating ourselves that we really aren't in that category. I mean, back in that day, if you just think about it, and we just ran through a little assessment with these two, and we looked at the story, and we said to ourselves, who is it that's the good person? Who is it as far as before God is the good person? How do you measure who's really good? I mean, who do you think in this story read their Bible more regularly, the Pharisee or the tax collector? It'd have to be the Pharisee. That's what they did all the time. Who do you think prayed more often to God, the Pharisee or the tax collector? Well, it'd have to be the Pharisee. Who do you think knew more and understood more about God and the biblical doctrines that are contained in the Scriptures? Who do you think got that more, the Pharisee or the tax collector? It's the Pharisee. Who had a better reputation among people? If you'd ask people just on the street, who's more faithful to God? Who has a better reputation before God? Pharisee or tax collector? It'd have been the Pharisee. I mean, if you did a little self-assessment and you just stood before them and said, hey guys, which of you two is the one who's closest to God? Which one would have been the one to say, it's me? It'd have been the Pharisee. And who would have been the one to say, I'm in desperate need of God? Oh, that would have been the tax collector. And it turns out that Jesus says, that person, the person who knows that they are in desperate need for God, that person is the person who's actually closest to God. We have a phrase in our day, in our world, where we talk about how to keep everybody on the same level and being in a community where there's no front put on. We talk about keeping it real or not putting up a front. Jesus starts a community where he says, hey, everybody's welcome. Anybody can come. It doesn't matter what you've done or who you've been or where you've gone or what you've gone, because everybody is welcome in this community because people matter to God. Which people? All people. How much do they matter to God? More than you could possibly know. But Jesus says it's not the kind of community where we do what we talk about in our world, where we just therefore tolerate everything, where we just say, hey, everybody's welcome, because none of the stuff really matters. Everybody's welcome. This is a community where we say, hey, nobody's perfect. But it doesn't mean because nobody's perfect, we just accept whatever's happened. We just say, nobody's perfect. So therefore, we all desperately need God. Instead, it means we don't have to pretend. It means we don't have to wear a mask. We don't have to fake it. This is a place because nobody's perfect. Then nobody gets to walk around and say, hey, I've got it all together. I don't really have any real problems. I'm thankful there's a place where everybody's welcome, and I'm thankful people with problems can come. But it's not really me. I'm here as a strong person. I'm here to help other people. My family, me, we don't have any real problems. The number one rule in the community of Jesus is you shall keep it real. There should be no mask. There's no faking here. I think that's part of why the tax collector winds up going to the temple. I mean, why would he do that? Why would he wind up going to a place like that where he knew he didn't belong? Well, see, when people finally get real, it's when they get in front of other people and before God and they just acknowledge, God, this is who I am. I'm not putting on any front. I desperately need you. When you finally can bring yourself to say those words, there's a freedom from not having to put the mask on again, from not having to hide, not having to pretend. Healing comes when we are fully known. Then we can be fully loved. When we lie, when we hide, when we wear a mask, it's behind the mask that sickness is contained. It's behind the mask that sickness remains when you continue to hide. My mom used to tell me, in fact, I think everybody in the society I grew up in said, hey, the most important thing you have is your reputation. Guard your reputation. Make sure you have a good reputation. Well, it didn't take me too long to realize that reputation is what other people think about me. It doesn't really have much to do with who I really am. Reputation is just what people say. And if I can carefully kind of mask what people see about me, if I can just let people see what I want to see, I can have a good reputation when in fact I am not all that good. And keeping a good reputation, it kept me pretty sick for a long time. It made me very angry. It was only when I got to the place that people said to me, hey, it's not your reputation that matters. It doesn't matter what other people think about you. It's when you come to a place that you care about what's in your heart, what's in your character. It's not what your reputation is, it's who you are. It's what you are that really matters. You don't have to hide. You can be completely honest. And in honesty, there's healing. But we live in a world where we are taught by reflex. If you want to be accepted in this world, you want to be loved in this world is for winners. This world is for people who have it all together. But Jesus starts a community where he says, hey, this community is for the misfits. This is for the broken. This is for people who have humbled themselves and gotten real before God and before each other, and they wear no mask. They are completely authentic. You noticed, didn't you, that the turning point in this story is when the loser, when the misfit, when the tax collector, when he finally says in it from his heart, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. What he's really saying is, God, I've been following my way, and I thought I had it all together, and I thought I was better than other people. And my way is no good. God, I give up control of my life. I surrender my life to your way. In AA, in 12-step programs, there's a moment that comes when a person finally walks in and they say, hi, I'm Ed, and I'm an alcoholic. And everybody responds, hi, Ed. It's in that moment when a person can finally come to a place of saying, this is who I am. It doesn't even mean they've completely done with it. It doesn't. In that moment, they are celebrated and they are loved and accepted for admitting who they are. People in 12-step groups they're not honoring alcohol. They're not celebrating alcohol. Alcohol has done much damage. Alcohol could ruin a soul. Alcohol can take a person and destroy them. What they're celebrating is a person who finally came to their senses and said, this is who I am. No hiding, no mask. It may take me years to completely come to the place, but people celebrate. Hey, you're welcome here. The ground is level here. We're all the same here. You're welcome. Jesus starts this new community, and he says, hey, everybody's welcome. And the idea is it's going to be a place where everybody is loved. Everybody can be included. But not because everybody's great and everybody is great before God, but because all of us, there's no one perfect. And we all desperately need God. We're all going to meet on the common ground of the cross, where Jesus gave his life to make us who we could really be. There's a children's story that's really very old now. In fact, I'm not even sure that parents read it anymore to their kids. It's called The Velveteen Rabbit. It's a story about a little toy, a little rabbit that's made out of velveteen. He wasn't very expensive. He's not worth a lot. But he is deeply loved by the little boy to whom he belongs. The rabbit overhears in the nursery one day that it is possible for toys to be made real. That if he's really loved, he could become real. He says, "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day. "Does it mean having things inside of you that buzz and a stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you're made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you when a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you. Then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you're real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once? Like being wound up?" he asked. "Or does it happen bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become it. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or people who have sharp edges, or people who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you're real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints, and you're shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you're real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." Jesus began a community where people could come. And at the cross, where he made things right with God, we could be made real. And by that I mean, because we are really loved by God, who gave his Son for us, we could be made who God thought we could be all along. And some folks don't understand. But when people do, there's this power that gets released. Because everybody is welcome and nobody has to pretend like there's perfect. In that community, anything at all is possible. And we're going to talk about that next week. But in the time that we have left in this service, we're going to do kind of a practice of not putting on a front, of keeping it real. And for the next few moments, I'm going to invite you to something that you can do, something that has the potential to unleash a power to change you. And I just want to say to you, if you're with us for the very first time, we're so glad you came today. And I'll just say to you, if what takes place in the next few minutes is so odd to you and you don't really want to participate in it, one, I want to say to you, we don't do this every week. In fact, we won't be doing this next week if you'll come back. We just think that this could be an opportunity for something really important to take place. But if in the middle of it, you don't want to do what we're talking about, it's completely okay. You do not have to participate in this. What's going to happen is, in the next few moments, we're going to take communion together. Now, communion, or the Lord's Supper, as it's sometimes called, is something we do because Jesus asked us to. He asked us to never forget, those of us who love him, who've given our lives to follow him, that we never forget what he's done for us. So around Community Christian, we take communion every time that we come together to remember that Jesus has made the ground level at the cross so everybody could be made welcome. Today, when we take communion, we're going to do things a little differently. Normally, this is a time for followers of Christ, and we would say, hey, there are going to be emblems that are passed down the road. There's going to be a cracker, and there's going to be some juice, and trays will pass down your row. But today, we're not going to pass trays. Instead, around the room where you're at, there have been stations set up where the bread and the juice, they're set on this table, and we're going to give you an opportunity. After some reflection and prayer, we're going to give you the opportunity to just go and take it as you want. Here's what's going to happen. Our band's going to come out, and they're going to sing a song, and This song is an invitation from God. You'll hear it immediately. This is a song where God reminds us everybody's welcome, that you are welcome to come just as you are. But, you don't have to leave the way you came. While this song is sung, you can hear that invitation, and as you learn the words, you can just sing along. Well, while you're singing, I hope you'll take the opportunity that we're hoping will happen, that you'll keep it real. Today when you came in, on the chair nearby there was a mask, and of course the mask is a symbol for us of what we've been talking about. It's the kind of things we wear to keep us safe, we think, or to keep our reputation right, so people will think we're actually better than we actually are. We want this time for communion today with these masks to be a time of prayer and reflection. But let me be real clear. This is not a prayer. The prayer that we're asking you to pray is not a general prayer. This is not a prayer that you're going to pray for healing for some distant relative that has some health problem. This is not a time even for you to pray about some struggle that you are personally having at work or something later. You're going to pray about all those times later. This is a time for us to pray. This is a time for sinners to pray. This is a time for us to come together and to say, God, I'm in desperate need of you. And you can pray on your own. And if sometime in the middle of you praying and reflecting, you realize what the mask is you wear, you can just take your pen and you can write on that mask. Their mask you can write on. You can write what it is that keeps you from being real, what it is that keeps you from being completely honest before God and before other people. And then you could just get up and you could walk to a station and you could take communion to remember Jesus. And you could take that mask when you throw away the cup in the garbage can. You can throw that mask away as a symbol of reminding yourself, I'm becoming completely clean before God. No mask between me and God. I'll also say to you that at the table today, when you go to that place, there will be some people standing by that if you would like somebody to pray with you, they'll be there to pray with you. You just walk over to them and say, hey, would you pray with me? And they'll have prayer with you for God to be with all of us who are in desperate need of His help, all of us who are sinners. See, there's something that happens. There's something powerful that happens when a community where it's safe and where people are loved. There's something that happens when the thing that holds people back, when people finally say, God, it's me that needs your grace. It's not someone else. God, I desperately need your grace. When people say that, there's a power that gets released. Whatever it is that you need God's mercy for. Maybe you're addicted in some way. Maybe there's something you can't stop doing. Maybe you're addicted to alcohol or to drugs and everybody else could see it in your life, but you've never been able to say, hey, I'm Ed, and I have this addiction. You've never been able to admit it out front. This is a time for you to admit that mask that you wear that you can't get real before God and other people. Maybe there's something you've done that weighs you down and you feel it all the time. Maybe you had an abortion. Maybe you wrecked your marriage. Maybe you had an affair. Maybe you're responsible for the pain that's going on in your family. Maybe you betrayed somebody. Today could be the day that you could just write that down and name it and say, God, I need your mercy. God's grace is greater than any of those things, and there is mercy for you. Maybe you've been carrying around resentment and anger. Somebody has hurt you deeply, and you know you're supposed to love. You know you're supposed to give, but you wear this barrier between you and them. You just need to name it and say, God, I need mercy for that. I'm the one. I need mercy. God, be merciful to me. Maybe there's a pride of resentment and judgmentalism and superiority in you, that you see other people with real problems, and the only thing you can think to say is, thank God I am not like them. Maybe today you need to let go of the pride that keeps you from being the loving person that God is calling you to be. Maybe you've stolen stuff. Maybe you spent time in jail. Maybe on the outside everything in your life looks great, but you know your whole life is just about you. That everything's about you. This is a community where you do not have to fake it because nobody's perfect, and we want to keep it real. So if during this time you'd like to take that mask and you'd like to just throw it away as a reminder that you are a person that needs God. I don't understand it really. I don't know why it takes place, But when people get real and they get honest, there's a power that gets released in them. When we say, God, have mercy on me, there's a kind of freedom that comes from letting go and owning up. So I'm going to pray. And our band is going to come and they're going to begin to sing a song. And you take a moment to reflect. And then for those of you followers of Christ, you can go to the stations and you can remember Jesus and you can pray and you can drop your mask and you can become clean before God, because Community Christian is a place where everybody's welcome, because everybody, every person matters to God more than you can possibly imagine. But it's also a place where we remember nobody's perfect. And we are all in desperate need of God's grace. This is a time for us to get real and to receive mercy as we drop the masks that keep us from God and other people. Let me pray. Would you bow your heads? I just want to remind you before we go into this time that there's mercy and grace and forgiveness for everything that you've ever done. And this is not a community of perfect people, particularly not the person who is speaking to you right now. This is not a community for successful people. This is a community for people in desperate need of God. God, everybody here, we're failures. We messed up. We're sinners. We're guilt-ridden. We're anxious. We're fearful. We're greedy. We're sex-obsessed. We're betrayers. We're resentful. God, we're so grateful for Jesus. So God, I pray right now that you would pour out your mercy on us, and that in the next few moments, masks would get dropped, and we would get real. Oh God, have mercy on me, a sinner. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.